Sweet. So, this channel's still pretty new. I've only got a few videos out, but felt like it was a good time to do a 2024 wrap up. Just go over like my top 10 fantasy book reads. There's one that's not fantasy. Uh, it's kind of fantasy. And then top 5 manga and top 5 comics I've read over the course of 2024. As far as books go, I read 97 books this year. I'm hoping to hit the 100th by the 31st, but we'll see. I have no idea how many comics and manga I read. I didn't read that many comics. Did read a hella big amount. I read a lot of manga. So most of these books I'm going to be going over are books that I have read in the second half of 2024. Me and my sister moved into this apartment in the Woodlands, and a lot of my other books, my physical copies, are back home at my dad's house. But I would be including the Crippled God and Fool's Fate in this top 10 list, probably at the very front. Because if you know me, Robin Hobb and Steven Erikson are my two favorites ever. So those would be the 1 and 2 picks. But we're going off of second half of this year. So the first book on the list that I want to cover is an honorable mention. I've been reading this series for a hot minute and I really enjoy it. They're kind of like palate cleansers for me. And I don't know, just the series I'm talking about is the Dresden Files, and the book I'm going to be highlighting today is Deadbeat by Jim Butcher. Book 7 in the Dresden Files. Um, this I think might be the best in the series so far. If not this, then it's probably Grave Peril. But I think I started this series this year, and I'm currently on book 11, Turncoat. And the series is not perfect. It's got some issues. Some of the dialogue can be kind of corny at times, and Dresden can come across as a tad bit misogynistic, though not as bad as I feel like people claim. Now, I'm not defending a misogynist. He's more like defends a girl that can fend for herself because he thinks he's being chivalrous. He's that kind of sexist. He's not the kind of like, oh, women can't do this. He's not like that. But some of his scenes can be kind of douchey. But he's kind of like a dorkier John Constantine from DC Comics. Like he's an ass, but when it comes down to it, he's somebody you want on your team. He's a great friend to have, and it's just sometimes nice having like this flawed but really rootable character in, especially whenever I've been reading a lot of grimdark lately. All right, so next up is going to be ugh, The Lost War by Justin Lee Anderson, book 1 in the Eden saga. Now I'm currently a little over halfway through book 2, The Bitter Crown. I started it like 2 days ago, and I'm loving that one. This, I will say, what I heard going into it was absolutely true. This has an insane twist that really it just changes up the entire nature of the series when you get to the end of book 1. It's just groundbreaking, absolutely devastating twist. Like it just blows your mind. And I heard that going in, so I was looking for it, and I got super close to calling it. Actually, I remember laying in bed with my girlfriend, and I'm like, "What if?" And then I basically said what the twist was, and I'm like, "No, that doesn't make any sense." And then the next morning, I read it, and it did make sense when Justin Lee Anderson explained it. But the twist is amazing. I really love the characters of Mariston and Elandria. Um, I don't think this book has a weak character. Um, all right, so number 9, and a lot of people warned me about this book. They said just get through book 1 and then you can enjoy books 2 and 3. I have not gotten to book 2 yet. It might be my last read of the year. I really want to read book 2, but book I'm talking about is A Blood and Fire by Ryan Cahill. Now I heard from a lot of people that this was very reminiscent of Wheel of Time or Lord of the Rings, which I love Lord of the Rings, and I read all 15 books of Wheel of Time and could not stand it. This reminded me so much of Wheel of Time, but I loved it. Like, to me, it has a lot of the same story beats as Wheel of Time, which are kind of the same story beats that Tolkien had. But the dialogue between characters, the familial relationships, the friendships, the little you know, village boy and the bar maiden girl, their little romance. Everything was just written a lot more believably than Robert Jordan's books, in my opinion. I know there's a lot of love online for Robert Jordan's books. I just wasn't one of them. But Ryan Cahill, absolutely loved it. It took the best of what Jordan was doing and the epic scope, the focus on these young village boys, but shaved away all the flaws. No more awkward dialogue, no weird sexist worldviews. And our three main characters in here, I really enjoyed. Kaylin Breyer, I think, is off to a great start as a main character. And what's his name? So this series is called The Bound and the Broken. Kaylin, our main character, is the Bound, and then there's this other older character, Aeson, I think his name was, that we meet. That's the Broken. Aeson, I have a feeling, will probably be my favorite character in the series. Right now, it's too early to tell. I know a lot of people say in book two, Dane is their favorite, but I don't know. This Aeson character, I think it's Aeson. I'm going to be so embarrassed if that's not what it was. I really love him as a character. I forgot to mention this as so my number 8, Blood and Fire was number 9. I did not number these. My bad. But my number 8 is going to be Book of the Ancestor, and I don't have the paper copies of the main series, but this is Tales of Abath, which you should read after the main 3 books. Or actually, like, one of the short stories is after book 1, the other short story is after book 2, and then the third one is after book 3. But I definitely think the final book in this, the final short story in this collection, you need to read to really uh, get the end of Nona's story. But Book of the Ancestor to me had my favorite character from 2024, my favorite new character. I loved Nona Gray. For my favorite character of 2024, it's going to go to Nona Gray, and this was my number 8 pick. Next up, we're actually going to have book 2 from this series because I just thought it completely changed the game from book 1. Is Harrow the Ninth, book 2 in the Locked Tomb by Tamsin Muir. Now, book 1, Gideon the Ninth, I see get a lot of love, and then a lot of people are left disappointed by book 2 because it's so different. Um, I think this was so much better than book 1, and I gave book 1 like a 3.5 stars. This was a 5-star read. The prose was exceptional. The way she uses second tense but ties it into the narrative was phenomenal. I've heard the same thing about the Broken Earth trilogy, but I haven't read that. But the way she uses second person in here, Tamsin Muir was cooking. It's so good. Um, as always, the characters of Harrow and Gideon are pretty awesome, pretty remarkable. And I also really did like Nona and Gideon. It's just I'm only putting one book from the series on this list. I did like Nona the Ninth a lot too. I think Nona I also gave a 5 stars, which is not normal. Most people like Gideon the most and Nona the least, and Harrow's like somewhere in the middle. For me, Harrow and Nona up here, and then Gideon was like still good, but all right. And then next up, I have, in this, I'm kind of cheating on this one because I would describe the whole series as like my number 6 pick. And that is The Forgetting Moon, book 1 in the Five Warrior Angels saga. Now, it seems kind of low to have this at number 6 because I do think it's one of my favorite series of all time, but this is my greatest reading year of all time. And I don't know. It just felt right at number 6, but I do think Brian Lee Durfee is one of the most gifted authors ever in fantasy. Anything he writes moving forward, I'm going to be completely captivated by. Of the classic fantasy with the modern twist, which has become very popular lately, which is something I absolutely adore. I actually think this might eclipse Bound and the Broken right now, but I've read 3 massive, chunky Five Warrior Angel books, finished the series, and I've only read 1 Bound and the Broken. So no, that's no shade on Ryan Cahill. I haven't gotten there yet. Damn, I'm building a mountain right now. Um, and I didn't remember my list. I have to look back and forth. Next up is I just did a review on this actually. It is Curse of the Mistwraith by Janie Wirtz, which I said was the second best prose potentially I've ever read in my life. Maybe third, maybe fourth. It's definitely top five though. And the only reason I seem so floaty on that ranking for her prose is because I've read one book by this woman. Like, I feel like I shouldn't be saying it's my new favorite series yet. Like, I need to go. I think my goal in the next couple months is to read Ships of Merrier and War Host of Vastmark and then see where it ranks. But right now, I do think it's going to be in my top 10 series of all time, potentially my top five. And prose wise, I'm pretty sure it's going to be in top five. All right. So next up, we have now this is not a book I've seen a lot of people talk about. And I want to go over like my journey with this real quick. So I started Christina Henry, started reading her this year, and I read her Alice book. Sorry, her Alice and her Red Queen book. This little duology, and I believe their Looking Glass is a series of novellas set in the same world. But she does a lot of these fairy tale reimaginings. This is, of course, of Alice in Wonderland. But what made my list is actually The Lost Boy by Christina Henry, the true story of Captain Hook. This was absolutely phenomenal. This it's a standalone, and I really wish it wasn't. I just could not stop thinking about this once I finished it. And it's short; you could read this in one day. And I think it took the mythos of Peter Pan and made it exponentially better. This is my favorite fairy tale reimagining book I've ever read. I have not read Brahm. I have not read, a lot of fairy tale reimaginings, but I do not see them getting better than this. The character of Jamie, the character of Peter, that duality, it almost felt like, like Batman and the Joker. Like Peter was obsessed with Jamie. Jamie is Hook, was obsessed with him in the way that the Joker was obsessed with Batman. Their little rivalry, friendship, brotherhood was absolutely phenomenal and one of the highlights of my reading year. All right, so we're getting down to this is the number 3 pick, and it is any other year this would have been number 1. It's Wind and Truth by Brandon Sanderson, fifth and final book of Arc 1 of the Stormlight Archive. I just did a review for this on my channel. You can check it out on my channel. There's a little spoilery review if you want to hear my thoughts on this. Brilliant. Uh, I don't know if it's recency bias. This is definitely, I liked it more than Oathbringer, and I definitely liked it more than Way of Kings. Does it beat Rhythms of War and Words of Radiance, though? Because I'd probably put Rhythm of War as my number 2, and this is number 1. Yeah, this is probably my favorite of the whole series. I don't think it's recency bias. I finished this book in 5 days, and it's like 1,400 pages, like 1,330. I could not stop. I had no life when this book came out until it was over, and I remember finishing this book and just being like, whoa. All right, so that's number 3. That will tip that tower over. And then number 2, now this, I have seen no love for this book, and I think it is an absolute travesty because it was just brilliant. The prose were brilliant. The storyline wasn't anything we haven't seen before. And the book I'm talking about is The Book of Elsewhere by Keanu Reeves and China Mieville. Now, I've never read a China Mieville book before this. Uh, I did read the Berserker comic book that inspired this book with Keanu Reeves and Matt Kent, and I thought that was decent. It was like, I don't know, like a 3 out of 5 stars as a comic book. This book took that story and elevated it so far above what that simple comic book did. This was truly, truly brilliant. And it's kind of hard to explain, but I guess it's about this immortal warrior named Unyut that has been alive since damn near the dawn of mankind, and he has perfect memory. So he remembers everything he's experienced in perfect detail, and he's lived this long, long, long life, and he cannot die. When he does die and his body is completely destroyed, his body forms a cocoon elsewhere, and this is the Book of Elsewheres. And At first it seems like this like government agent immortal warrior story, and it is that, but you also get chapters in second person that are about his flashback chapters, very much centered on Unyut as a character and not on the current day thriller plot. And then you get, I think, first person. Yeah, it's been a while since I've read it. You get first person accounts from different characters in Unyut's past. So you go from third person to first person to second person, and it's just done so well. And I think this deserves more love. I think it's very misunderstood because I think most people that see Keanu Reeves' name are like, yes, a big action movie, and they read it and they're like, what the is going on? Like, it's so confusing. But then China Mieville fans who are probably used to this like new weird fiction style feel like it's a dumbed down version of other China Mieville books. I don't know. I haven't read other China Mieville books. If they're even better than this, that's awesome. But China Mieville fans that I saw online dogging this book, I think you need to realize like this is a collaborative work with Keanu Reeves. It's based off a comic book, and for what it is, this had no business being this good. This was an absolute. It was so close to number one. It was so like, and I didn't even feel like it was number one when I read it, but I just kept thinking about it and thinking about it and thinking about it. And then my number one pick, it is the Seven Moons of Mali Almeida by, excuse me, Shihan Karunatilaka. And this author has written another book called Chinaman that I have not read, and he, I believe, got shortlisted for the Pulitzer or the Booker for a work that was never even published, which is kind of interesting. This won the Man Booker Prize, I think, in 2022. Yeah, Man Booker Prize win 2022, and this is about Mali Almeida, who is a war photographer in Sri Lanka during the Sri Lankan Revolution that the United States has their hand in for some reason. Uh, U.S. government can be pretty shady, and you follow this gay photographer, gay war photographer, and part of it is about the Sri Lankan Civil War. Part of it is about Mali Almeida's sexuality. Part of it is about uh, the concept, the theme of mortality, but you follow Mali Almeida after he dies. Page one, he's dead. He has 7 moons before he goes to the light. You don't know what the light is. You don't know none of that. Um, I don't want to spoil the ride because I knew absolutely nothing going in, and I think that's how you should experience it. So, top 5 manga of the year. Number 5 spot is going to be Witch Hat Atelier by, oh, gotta get that author name in there. Kamomi Shirahama. I'm usually so good with book and manga artist names, but I think I just have camera anxiety. But Witch Hat Atelier, I definitely expected this to be like my number one manga pick. Now I did really enjoy it, but it's just some books beat it out. This is a story about magic is just art, pretty much. It's just art. They draw a certain ward, and then it has certain magical properties. Um, I thought that there was a lot of wonder and a lot of mystery in this story, but it while the art was amazing and probably the best manga art I've read this year, excluding maybe Vagabond, which also didn't make the list. Both of these books had amazing art, but I just didn't think the story was as good as everyone hyped it up to be. But also, I'm very early on in these stories. I'm not even halfway through Witch Hat, and I'm only 2 deluxe into Vagabond, so who knows what the future holds. My number 4 pick, I've only read one, and that's The Blade Immortal. And I love this one. I think this was my surprise manga hit of the year. It's only at number 4 because I've only read one of them, and it's a 10 deluxe volumes story. And actually, crazily enough, first like volume within the deluxe, I was like, this is not for me. This is like way too action heavy. Um, doesn't seem like there's a lot of depth here, and just keep going. The villain in here is very well written. Our two protagonists are just their relationship with each other. I think is very nuanced and very layered. Even though on the surface it seems like been here, done that. Oh, and it is by Hiro Aki Samura, which I actually did some research on this mangaka. He redrew a lot of these panels to go left to right, but then that didn't catch on for mangas being printed in English, and they just started printing them right to left as we know them. But uh, major respect for this mangaka for putting that work in to adapt these manga for Western audiences. Immense respect for that. All right, and then number three is going to be uh, two series. It's going to be To Your Eternity and A Silent Voice, which I'm not going to get that out right now. These are both by Yoshitoki Oima, and Silent Voice is one of the works that made me a fan of anime to begin with. So I've always been interested in reading the manga, but when I went to read Yoshitoki Oima, I started with something that I was less familiar with. Um, because the movie's still fresh in my mind. I've seen that movie like 5 times, so I knew the plot for the most part. It was still worth reading the manga, but I wanted to start with something fresh, so I did To Your Eternity. And while the plot can be pretty formulaic, I do think it's worth sticking with, and it was a pretty emotional, deep story, and I enjoyed it. Number two is Dawn to Dawn. Absolutely awesome manga. I loved it. If it weren't for the number one pick, like if I'd read that and been caught up before I picked up Dawn to Dawn would have easily been my favorite manga of the year. As it is, this is so neck and neck with my number one pick, and this only has 9 volumes, and my number one pick has a lot more than 9 volumes. All right, so my favorite manga of the year is One Piece by Ichiro Oda. Ichiro Ichiro Oda. I don't even. Do I really need to talk about? Everybody on the internet knows what One Piece is, and they were all right. I did not think I would like this as much as I ended up liking it. It reminds me a lot of Adventure Time or Discworld, just like this absurdist humor. But unlike those two, there's a lot more heart in this than something like Discworld I've found. Uh, Adventure Time has a lot of heart too, and I do really love Adventure Time. But I mean, One Piece is probably the best piece of absurdist fiction I've ever experienced. Um, it's just phenomenal. Every character is amazing. The antagonists are great. Um, just not a lot of weak points. I do find Buggy very annoying, um, but never to the point where I like want to stop reading. I just don't get the Buggy appreciation that other people have. Top five comics of the year. Um, Number five, gosh, this book is massive. Is The Immortal Hulk by Al Ewing. Um, this was when I began this series. I definitely thought it would be one of my favorite comics of the year. And in the beginning, it starts out as this really, really good horror comic, and then it turns into like anti-capitalism, which I was also on board for. And then it goes back to the body horror, and then is like a it just felt like everything it did it succeeded at, but I felt like it did so much that it kind of lost me. um and just the side characters aside from Bruce, oh, that's what it is. uh the themes were amazing, the characters were not. No character really grabbed me in this Al Ewing run that everyone says is the best Hulk run ever. I believe it probably is the best Hulk run, but it's just not a comic for me. That being said, it's still my number five pick. All right, and then number four is actually something I am a huge fan of, but I'm so early on that I don't want to, put it higher than number four at the moment, and that is the Hellboy universe by Mike Mignola. Uh, yeah, Mike Mignola. Terrible with names. Hellboy is just a huge blast. It's exactly what I needed after I finished Swamp Thing. I wanted something in that Swamp Thing, Constantine, Dresden Files vein as far as comics go. Paranormal investigation, that kind of thing. And it's really good. I've read the first omnibus and I've read the short stories omnibus. I think next up I have to read the short stories omnibus 2 and then on to the second mainline omnibus. And you can find the reading order for this on Dark Horse's website. And then after that, um, I had the truly spectacular Black Hammer universe. Now, Black Hammer is not something that I view as perfect. There were a few miniseries within the overall universe that I felt like missed the mark for me. Specifically, the Barbalian miniseries was just not it. It was trying to tell this. There was a good story there. It was about like the AIDS pandemic, and it was trying to tell a love story in that setting. I thought that that was a very good story at its core, but it was trying to tell it about the character of Barbalian, and it just really didn't fit into the mythos of the character. I think if Jeff Lemire had a little bit more time, he could have made it great. But every other series has been immaculate, 5 out of 5 stars, almost all of them. The Barbalian series just drags it down a little bit, and not because like I do think it was a good idea to tell a gay love story in that world, and I love that he was shining a light on the AIDS pandemic and showing how much it affects certain people. But I do think it kind of felt ham-fisted into that one character's story because we'd already gotten so many flashbacks with him. I'm like, does this really like why didn't he mention this guy before? Like, it's kind of just like that weird thing where they go back, but we already had flashbacks, so they expect us to believe like this happened in between flashbacks they already gave us, and it never came up organically in conversation. I just didn't buy that, and then on top of it, it just felt rushed. It felt like the way fitting it into the mythos was rushed. That's enough talk about Barbalian. Black Hammer's my number 3 pick. All right. And then my number 2 pick, I don't have with me, but it is the Alan Moore run of Swamp Thing, which is famous at this point. An absolutely phenomenal run on the character of Swamp Thing. I enjoyed it immensely. No, no. This is why I need a script. Yeah, yeah. Number 2 is Swamp Thing, and number 1 was Strange Adventures by Tom King. Absolutely love anything by Tom King, anything by Alan Moore. Those are my 2 favorite comic book writers ever in the history of ever. I also really like Brian K. Vaughan, but he hasn't put out anything but new Saga issues in years. Um, and he's up there, but those are my 3. And this year I read Swamp Thing by Alan Moore, which I do think might be his best comic ever. I'd put it over Watchmen, put it over V for Vendetta. Haven't read League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, but I'd put it over Miracle Man. Yeah, I'd say Swamp Thing might be Alan Moore's best work. And then my number 1, I think I just mentioned that, Strange Adventures by Tom King. And I do have um, some Tom King books that I haven't read that I really want to get to this year. He is mainly known for doing like superhero deep dives. Like he'll take a superhero that maybe isn't that well known or that it's not that big A-list character, and he'll do a character deep dive into like their psyche. And a lot of people feel like it's like he relies too much on mental health to try to be to say something substantial, or to say something that's really thought provoking. I have found every book he's written, aside from Batman, to be thought provoking. I thought Omega Man was fantastic. Mr. Miracle is my favorite comic I've ever read, and Strange Adventures is probably my second favorite comic I've ever read, and I read it this year. But I also have, I'm probably going to read him in 2025. I have Rorschach by him, and this is actually about to become a movie. And a lot of people probably don't know that this is Tom King. Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow, another Tom King book, and I hope to read both of these in 2025. It'll probably be, I plan on making a video on my top 10 books to read in 2025, and I may include like a top 5 comics and a top 5 manga. But just let me know in the comments if that's something you want, if y'all even like hearing about my comic book recommendations and the manga recommendations, or should I strictly stick with fantasy. And tell me what your best read of 2024 is. I don't care if you read a million books or if you read 2 books this year. I'd be glad to hear what you read, and if you think I'd like it based on the things I've reviewed. And yeah, peace, y'all. Thank you.